Kanaka, I'm Stanley Simpson and welcome to the season finale for Reset Fiji, your home for robust discussions, ideas, innovations and solutions for the last 7 weeks. As we wrap up the season 1 of Reset Fiji, tonight's finale will focus on actions going forward. We'll hear from those on the front line on the current state of the economic fallout. We will hear about efforts to mobilize and organize communities and people, and the tremendous goodwill and resources to enable partnerships. And we'll hear about the big ideas and actions on how we all need to begin the journey to transform and diversify Fiji's economy. The climate emergency and the impacts of the pandemic has exposed fundamental flaws of our current systems. The panelists and our people have called for a rewind, a rethink, and a reimagined Fiji. You have called for action. And tonight we have put together a combination of 3 panels to try to conclude on some clarity on the way forward. Joining me back on the panel this evening is Simeone Sebundrander from the Ministry of Itaukei Affairs, Shashi Kiran from Friend Fiji, and Kenneth Katafono from Traceable Solutions, and Maria Naulumatua, who's an urban planner. Panelists, welcome back to this season finale, and let's get straight to the discussion. Simi, one of the things that has come out pretty strong during this period is how people are finally rediscovering or trying to reignite or go back to the traditional systems, the indigenous systems, because for many of them it's what they saw as the last thing they had left to save them when the system kind of collapsed. And found out that it's the safety net that's been there that maybe has been forgotten or has been ignored because we've been so invested in a totally different systems. But my question to start off discussion is what is being done or what needs to be done to ensure that the promotion and strengthening of these traditional indigenous systems is what some may call ancient technologies, because we discussed this in the technology panel. How can we sustain this and bring that back to the forefront to ensure we have a sustainable future?
I remember mentioning the word safeguarding the last time I appeared on this panel, and I would like to revisit and refine that definition. When I mentioned safeguarding previously, I was alluding to UNESCO's 2003 definition on the 2003 convention, which Fiji ratified in 2010, in which the Ministry of Itaukei is implementing. Safeguarding, the key words in safeguarding, according to the convention, is identification, also documentation, research, preservation, protection, promotion, enhancement, and transmission. And we use this term intangible cultural heritage, which is UNESCO speak for systems. So when we are talking about intangible cultural heritage, still with the definition we've aligned ourselves with, it means the practices, the representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, the objects, artifacts, cultural spaces associated with it that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as a part of their cultural heritage. So when we're talking about systems, I'll be using them interchangeably, they're synonymous, systems and intangible cultural heritage, just to be clear. And when we are talking about systems or intangible cultural heritage, it is quite abstract. So the UNESCO Convention has sort of lumped it and categorized culture into 5 categories or domains, and these include, the first is oral traditions and expressions, performing arts, social practices, rituals and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and traditional craftsmanship. And going on, when you're talking about systems and practices and values, it is really, on the UNESCO Convention, we're looking at social practices, rituals, and festive events. And I'd like to bring to the fore a practice, a system, which was ancient and which is now known, it is known today as Solesolebaki or different versions of it. But let me ground it on what it really means in the indigenous context. Solesolebaki, the different, the Lawans know it as Mbale Mbale. And the definition If I read just as quickly from the definition in the Fijian dictionary, "Thaka-thaka-bata," meboka te-te tarabale thara-thara, which means solosalovaki is an intransitive verb. It's working in collaboration, usually in plantations, house constructions, and cleaning up. But solosalovaki, the system that is a backup, the safety net, is more than collaboration and working together. It is held together by an invisible glue called veokani or kinship. Imagine a net, the nodes that bind the net, that connect the net, that's the veokani. That's what holds it together. So these nodes, these bonds, they run on invisible values. Well, values are invisible anyway. These include we wakaturangataki, we wakaliu, the deference, deferring to one another. Wakarorongo, we rongorongo, the listening to each other. We lomani, we kawitaki, caring and expressing concern for the well-being of others. We wakarogorogotaki, having mutual respect for each other. We dokai, honoring, respecting, and upholding someone. Right. So these are the values.
Yeah, and I wanted to just come in there and say it's an invisible value, it was strength. So, and now we're scrambling to find that invisible value, to strengthen it, to make it in some ways visible. How did it become invisible in the first place? You know, how did we let it go? How did we get to this stage for it to take a pandemic to make us, hey, we have to go back and look at this? What happened? And what do we need to do to ensure we don't fall back, don't let it happen again?
Thank you. Beginning in 1874, when Fiji was ceded to Great Britain, the shift began from the communal to the individual, from the subsistence to the individual economy. Because the subsistence relied where the bedrock was the collaboration, the solosalovaki, the move towards modernization and the cash economy began to fragment that. So the journey has been going onward since 1874, independence, post-colonial, and thanks to COVID, or because of COVID, people realized, there is something that worked. Just because it's old doesn't mean it has no place. But the fact that COVID happened, a safety net that once was thought was marginalized, that's the word, was brought back to the fore, because that safety net did not run on economics and individualism. It went back to the values, community-driven values.
Okay, so can they coexist in the current? They can coexist.
It's like trying to mix water and kerosene. They may, but they will always be different. They can coexist, but in their own time, place, and space. But it's it may, it can, it cannot. It's a very distinct line. It will need its own set of circumstances and the specifics, but it can work. Maybe not in collaboration.
Can people cross between those two lines? Can they move back and forth, like say to the village and back to the city?
I think this has been the case since
the city for education, back to the village for safeguards, for food security.
I believe the people who belong to the group I'm talking about, the Itauke, have been sort of living in this marginal world, putting on this cap, operating in this set of circumstances, taking it off and putting on another hat, working in this sort of circumstances. So yes, being marginal has sort of become the norm because of the situation we are in. One has taken precedence over the other. Yes.
Naka. I'll come to Shashi now because you are, what would some say, on the front line out there in the West, on the Western Front, in the issue of food security. Much of the economic hardship we're facing now is, we see from the West, especially with the big strike on the tourism industry. So it's become a issue of severe consequence. Over 118,000 is a conservative number who have lost their income. And, you have started initiatives. And one of the key things that I'd like you to touch on is the status now in terms of food security and your ideas on food banks. And I think the question then to jump on is, how do we strengthen food security?
Nisambula Vinaka, and a very good evening to all. Yes, as soon as the crisis struck, one thing that was very obvious was food as a challenge. And currently, Nandi has felt the brunt of it, and we are particularly concerned about urban and peri-urban. People who have very limited land and do not necessarily have access to sea. So food security is a huge challenge there. But in the rural sector, also where there is food in abundance, if you look at it, with one eyes, but there has been so much dependence on processed foods that people still feel a lack, that they're not able to provide rice, flour, oil, sugar, dal to their family members, even though now when we're doing food bank, we have been trying to include local nutritious foods and also making sure that some of the money goes back into the rural local economy. So we've been trying to look at what will last long, wild yams. When we ask for wild yams, and we're buying wild yams right now, there's 10, 15 different varieties of wild yams lying in the hills. And it's available, but people don't necessarily consider it food, or it's the last resort, whereas that is a much more healthier option. And because it lasts for a month, we've been adding that. Lumi, you can see fresh lumi available in the market, but there's options where you can dry it, and we're trying to do that. We're trying to sun-dry fish to put it back. So, back in the food bank. So we need to rethink in terms of what does food look like for us to be food secure, and what does food mean. So other than providing the food that we are giving, we also working with people on what does food security look like. If there are small spaces, what sort of gardens do we make? But also looking at the perennials, because we're going into the drought space and cabbages and things will have difficulty growing. So we're working with about 25, 30 perennials with the different people. And we've been very grateful. Kenneth is on the panel. We're working with Traceable Solutions in ensuring that we'll be monitoring the food security to see on individual families how this looks like. What does food security look like for the rural as well as some of the urban areas? We have started communal farms. Now that's not new. And that's something that's been part of our tradition. There used to be food communal reserves in each village, which over time has disappeared. So some of the villages have picked up the communal food banks. That means that people who are returning from a tourism industry and coming back to the village, their children will not sleep hungry. Hopefully there's food. So that's one of the key factors we want to push. It doesn't matter whether it's urban, rural, any ethnic group, we need to be thinking about how much more do we plant. I also quickly want to go to the food security issues in schools. When we think about school feeding program, we still think about rice and flour and noodles and tin meat, whereas people around the schools have abundance of local foods. But we're not turning the cassava, the fish, and the coconut into a meal, for example, because we are working with some schools who are asking for food. So there needs a whole entire shift of thinking about what should food look like. And once the whole community gets involved, there would be a different level of community ownership. And I go back to the tradition. We've had strong tradition of drying, food preservation, and that needs to become a mainstream. It's not how should I say, it's not primitive. It's the new modern. I think the world will be very happy to eat fresh. These are our communal systems always had really good quality food. They're stored well. They're not processed. They're not full of chemicals. And that can provide food security for our families and for generations to come. But it can also become a commodity. For example, we are buying sun-dried lumi. So it's becoming a commodity, and it's something that could be marketed as well. So I would like to say that, we really need to look at our elders who are living amongst us, learn from them, and make that part of not only food security, but think about livelihoods in terms of commodities.
So how food looks. So you're saying that the people in the rural areas in the West are feeling they don't have food security because they don't have the rice, the tin fish, the sugar, and the tea, and that we really need to relook at that. When you're adding now, you're saying yams in your food bags, how is that being received from the people?
Very well so far. we do see that some people get taken
And how
aback.
easy to source?
It's very easy to source. It's incredible how easy it is to source because it's yam season and most of the hills have yams. So we are buying. But a lot of people don't know the different names of the yams, like people would say, oh, this is Kawai or this is Tivoli. But we are seeing so many different varieties. And when we talk to elders, they're talking about 15, 20 different varieties of wild yams right now. People also don't know how to eat it, When we talk about lumi and we talk about yams, people will say, would kids eat it? Why not? Because we haven't been feeding them this healthy, good options. Fiji's had a major malnutrition problem because we've been so dependent on processed foods. So it is easy to access, but people need to relearn to eat it. It's healthy, it's delicious.
So that you see that there's an issue. And just let's talk about food banks, the idea of food banks, before I move on to Kenneth. How is that working? Will that work just for communal villages? You say that's been in villages. But you also introduced an initiative now with the Lautoka town
city, yeah.
council. So you're trying to bring that into an urban area. How is that working out? And how does that work, if you can explain that?
We are hoping every urban center has some vacant land. And now people are talking about crime, people are talking about, can't access food in squatters. We were trying to have patches of food. If somebody is hungry, they should be able to go and harvest food, and they don't have to think about stealing. They don't have to, think about. Some places we go to, people tell us the children haven't eaten for a few days, and that's heartbreaking. There's a little bit of moda in the compound, and we've been eating that. So if there's food spaces where people could go and harvest, is what was our whole objective. So in Lautoka City, they have given us, the city council has given us a 2-acre plot, where we've been planting with the assistance with SDA youths. There is a SDA church nearby, and we've been just planting all sorts of foods that people could just come and harvest. Of course, it'll be courteous if they could just ask the SDA church there who are managing this. And we are hoping that in more and more spaces, we're talking to institutions. There are many churches who have vacant land, to be able to feed their congregation. We're talking to other religious institutes. We are talking to any vacant land if it can be converted into food. And food doesn't have to be cabbages. Yes, you have tapioca, you have mbele, you can plant 100. In this place, we have a couple of hundred of eggplants. We have flat bean, we have bele, we have moringa. Things that you grow once and people can keep harvesting for months to come, and they will be food. So I'm hoping that more and more organizations or people can think about how do we ensure that our people do not go to bed hungry, or our children do not go to bed hungry.
All right. I'll bring Kenneth in now. Kenneth, people don't really associate technology with food security, but you've stepped into that space with Chashi. And so I want to ask, how is that working? What did you do to get there? How do we need to scale up the technology and innovation to work with what some would call the ancient traditions, systems, technologies, values, with the gadgets and the apps which our children are very familiar with today? And how do we expand the technology into new markets with the women and their crafts, and obviously in the gardens?
Thanks, Stanley, and Bulavnak, everyone. So I just want to qualify my perspectives on this, and it's really coming from a homegrown technology company with a whole bit of experience working across the Pacific, and we focus only in the fisheries and agriculture sectors. So when the pandemic started, we obviously build software. We work with companies to implement software and apps. And so we were looking at opportunities where we could repurpose what we built as a digital agriculture platform and see how that could be used to help towards the pandemic. And friend Sashi approached us. And from there we quickly understood the needs that they had for food security with the programs that they were running. And we were able to very quickly build tools that they could utilize to collect data. And really, if we believe that information and knowledge is power, then data is extremely important. And digital technology, provides a whole bunch of data. So that's the space that we're in. We're trying to look at how we can collect data And I think through our association with Friend, they've been able to collect a lot of really good data and been able to utilize that to respond to the pandemic and to provide assistance through their various programs. And I think we're seeing this across across the social media space. A lot of small organizations, women's groups, they're now advertising more. They're advertising their products. They're using those channels to try and sell their produce to help their communities. And I think that people have just naturally moved to that because that's where the audience is, and that's what we can leverage. So I think we certainly do need to scale this up, and the first step really is understanding who needs these types of tools and the types of data that's required.
Technology has played a big part in this pandemic during this time. I mean, and the new initiatives, the Barter for a Better Fiji, people using it to sell things, to trade, and from the rural areas, I saw a lot of pictures or posts of people in their gardens, farming, or even in the urban areas, people taking pictures of their cabbages growing. I mean, there was this big upsurge in the use of technology. But people basically talking about, look, I'm planting, look, these are my seeds, this is my technology, this is my style of growing this, and a bit of show off was also going in there, but it was all good. It's social media. It was wonderful to see. But how do we take it to the next level, into where you are at the moment, into with the analysis and the data gathering and all that, as opposed from making it just being a simple someone, hey, I'm at the farm, look at this, I'm planting cover, I'm planting coconuts, I'm planting tapioca. How do they take it to the next level in terms of right now Facebook and maybe Instagram is where people are, but where do we take it to the next level for those that are listening out there?
Yeah, so I think this is a space that we've been working on for some time, and since we started looking at agriculture back in 2018, we started building what we've called Traceable Farms, the digital agriculture platform, which essentially is supposed to be a one-stop shop for anyone interested in agriculture or anyone involved in the agriculture value chain. So we have a mobile app available on the Google Play Store, and people can utilize that. And within that we have a feature that allows people. It's kind of like a digital marketplace, allows people to buy and sell. And for us, that was just we were just testing the market to see the demand for that. But we also quickly noticed that a lot of people have started posting things there about what they're selling, and people have actually sold stuff from it. So it's something that we are looking at to try and upscale. And we also, I think right now, because of social media, there's a lot of fragmentation in terms of knowledge, or agriculture knowledge, or backyard gardening knowledge. There's various groups. So what we are trying to do through this platform is probably try to aggregate that into one space where people can actually go to and find all these types of information, access these different people with expertise in this space.
Okay, great. I'll move on to Mary. Before I move on to Mary to talk about local government, put your hands up and alert me if you have a question for the panel. I'll be on the lookout, and I'll point you out to our runners when the time comes. Please keep it to questions, as we have limited time on this panel. Now, Mary, local government now coming to the fore. It's been kind of missing for some time in terms of probably been there, but not as strong with the impact. You are an expert in this area. How can we leverage the power of local government to where it should be at this time? I mean, what's the advice? What's the propose you would have for us going forward?
Okay, thank you, Stanley. I'd like to thank the earlier speakers, Simi, Sashi, and Kenneth. And first of all, I'd like to set the stage, or set the scene from where I'm coming from. And as Stanley says, local government is in the background, way, way back. Now, as an urban planner, I did call for stronger local governance. And that came from, I was inspired by the Lautoka group that mobilized themselves in helping the vulnerable during that lockdown when Lautoka went under. And if anything, we all witnessed the power of community. It's also evident that there is a major disconnect between around local government, between the ratepayer, the citizens and local government, but also national government and local government. I think it's time for us all to relearn our respective roles and responsibilities and just understand what it means to live in an urban area. Local government, in my view, must always remain as the community's first point of contact, because they're all part of the smaller community. And at that on that same line, I think that community, the citizens, should be made comfortable in speaking, in voicing their opinions openly and freely. We know that council services are limited by its revenue base, and this is absolutely not the time to be manipulating council's meagre income sources. So that's just setting the scene of where I'm coming from. I have 3 main points that I'd like to go further into, and that's access of information and local data. Now, we all agree that when community and council bind together, great things can come out of it. So whether it's traditional or even further, from Sashi talking about rural areas and coming together with the food banks and with your telecommunications, great things can be achieved if we all bind together. There are existing processes in local government and in urban planning policy that very few people take advantage of. An example is a call for submissions. When it's made, rarely do citizens take that opportunity to make a comment. So citizens will lose out on that important decision-making process. So members of marginal communities or, women, the elderly, there is an avenue out there where they can speak up and contribute to decision-making of the urban environment, but that needs a bit of improvement. I'm suggesting that all information in council legislation and policy, local data sets and current activities be made available and be open to the public in all media formats, preferably on a dedicated council website. That can happen tomorrow. This lays the foundation for accountability and transparency from local council to the citizens, and it also establishes a relationship based on trust and inclusive decision-making. I think that well-informed citizens, I'm sure we all think this, that well-informed citizens make for active, constructive participation, and creative solutions can come out of that. The second one, which is pretty close to my heart that I could go on forever on, is the reimagining of urban design solutions. Now, going back in history, in the 19th century, town planning changed a bit in response to the spread of cholera. So the reticulated sewer system came about. Into the 20th century, public parks were developed so that people could go out and get fresh air after the typhoid pandemic came out. And now into the 21st century, urban design solutions need to be reimagined to address the safe health protocols to curb the spread of this COVID-19. Now, I think town councillors, urban designers and developers need to support walkable neighbourhood designs and encourage mixed-use developments. And that is, people can walk from home to their place of work, to the health centre. It is already happening, but these spaces, these need to be safe. So either well lit or a good 2-meter wide footpaths, things like that. So that there's no need to travel out of town just to go and visit a doctor when they're all within walking distance. And the third one is on the environment. Now more than ever, there is a call for local resources, and I'm talking about low carbon, renewable sources of energy in particular, and to encourage people to move from the linear economy to a circular economy. And in my view, that reduces solid waste. From a council's point of view, I would like to see that they incentivize the use of renewable sources and nature-based solutions. So if someone at council is assessing an application, if the applicant can demonstrate they're harvesting water to flush toilets, you perhaps could get a discount in your application fees. Things like that could already be happening. And from the community end, can we all just be a bit more responsible with the waste that we create or at home, let's start separating our rubbish from home. And I can bet you that the council rubbish trucks don't have to come 3 times a week. That can be reduced, and then council saves money on that. So it's all a give and take. It's also coming in together, and it took a little virus to bring us together and to peel away the layers of this Western society that we've come to enjoy. Peeled away the layers, and we've turned to basic things as the values that we enjoy. So, and in this vulnerable state, it became evident that community inclusion is what the basis of all this. I would think that I'm seeing that people are wanting to do the right thing because they're part of a bigger positive thing. That's about it.
Thank you. And that's the question I'd like to really pose back to you, Simi and Shashi, because, we're talking about a system and people going back to the rural areas, going back to their traditions. The fact of the matter is, a large part of our population live in these urban areas. And some would say they are stuck now in these urban areas. Some may go back to the rural areas at this time during the pandemic because of the hardship. But when things change, we may all see them all run back to the city because they started to enjoy the new life that we have. So how, I ask again, how do we ingrain these systems that have thrived, that some would say in communal, village, rural settings, into urban settings, into an urbanized modern environment?
How can we ingrain the values? Okay. There is so much that an institution, an agency can do. There needs to be more collaboration between agencies that work on similar objectives. So when I say the need to inculcate, to encourage the values that I've just mentioned, there are spaces, time and spaces that need to be recreated to nurture those values. In the old traditional context, the nurturing of these values were catered for when there were these solevu, gifting, exchanges, festival of sorts. But then that happened in a context where people were together. And then now we are in the urban, the togetherness is threatened. And therein is the threat. The fragmentation is the threat to this vulnerable. The values I was talking about that glue the community collectiveness, it's like a spider's web. It's strong, but it is also vulnerable. And the vulnerability of collectivism and the shared values of community, the threat is the entire, the opposite on the other side of the continuum, running away from the community. So what I'm trying to say is, if we need to create collectivism, or not collectivism only, but to nurture the values inherent within, there needs to be ongoing, there are mechanisms in the community, in the society, that create this nurture.
But those spaces have to be found.
Have to be reclaimed is the better word. Not found, they're already there, just need to be reclaimed. Yes.
They have to be reclaimed. Yep. You wanted to say something to that, Shashi? I mean, because I'm just saying, it's not just values, even the language, something basic is that, but Shashi.
Thank you. I think, I'd like to go back to the urban. So we're working with housing sector, for example, housing, PRB, minimal space, food, how does it work? How do you plan for food in those kind of spaces? But I just want to quickly step back that a lot of values, even in the rural areas we've seen, like I'm saying, the communal farming is no longer there. We are seeing when people are disabled or in very difficult spaces, that loloma or that communalism is not necessarily there. It's more readily seen in festivals or funerals. But individually, when people are suffering, even in a village situation, we see that community is not there. But having said that, in squatter communities within the cities, you immediately see Turanikoro and some sort of hierarchy developing. But the beauty, or maybe I'm an outsider, but I know the beauty of communal governance that we see at a funeral. This, you know how in a community there's all the specific roles. That sort of thing, if it evolved in, say, for squatter communities or housing communities, bringing the best of what we had and thinking about the best of what are we exchanging with our villages in terms of food preservation. I think a lot of these things can be, like you said, reclaimed or rethought to reconnect us. Not sure if that answers your question,
Yeah,
Stanley.
no, I think that's... And I just want to bring Kenneth in because we're talking about the values that need to come back as a response to the pandemic, because that's really what we are seeing has worked. That people have banded together, they've looked after each other, people have gone home, people have lost jobs. I know old scholars are looking after lunches for children in their schools. Churches have stepped in. You know, that really, in essence, for Fiji at least, we don't have the major resources that many of the big nations, and even they are struggling, throwing money at their people to, bailouts and recovery money, relief funds to bail out the people, while for us, we went back to, the relief was in our values. How does technology, where does technology have a place in these values?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I think, technology, and if you think of, social media, if you think, I think those platforms provide an opportunity for different communities to organize digitally or remotely, for communities to support each other. Messaging platforms like Viber, there are several groups that run charities and they organize themselves that way. I was just thinking back to, I think, the points on people moving back to the rural spaces. I think investment in improving telecoms infrastructure in those areas, providing new types of services in terms of digital education, perhaps local government services electronically, so that people don't necessarily need to come into towns or urban spaces, and providing the means for people to be able to, say farmers, being able to connect to buyers digitally, and having that whole infrastructure to get the products. So I think those are some opportunities in that space.
And local government would have responded much more strongly to the situation that occurred.
Yes, I have this notion, having heard all of you speak of collectivism and reclaiming what really is just lying there underneath us all. I would like, as a reset for local governments, and knowing that there are people who live in the urban areas who don't have the option to go back. What if local council were to market itself as the council of choice to live in? So let's just say, Nandi and Lautoka can boast about beautiful weather. We can't beat them. Suva cannot beat them. So let's just say Nasinu can claim something that this is where a certain product is manufactured, and the community binds into that and is proud to be part of whatever town it is. So they can keep the economy local, they can keep jobs there, schools, and everyone just keeps within. And so if a lockdown is repeated, we can still sustain each other in this setting.
Right. Well, during the panel discussions, the reset discussions, we've heard about reset, which is the theme of our discussions. We heard about rethink, rewind, reimagine, and on this final panel finale night, we heard of another one, reclaim, from Simi, something that we can think of. Now, I understand we have one question. We'll take that question and you'll say your last comments and we'll finish off this panel. Let's have the question. Introduce yourself and your question, please.
Good morning. My name is Josiah. I work for the Pacific Island Association of NGO. I'm originally from Lomati, Divya in Laos. My question is when we're talking about values. Thank you so much to all our panelists for all your contributions this morning. Just on values, I've heard about institutions. What about our own homes, our own households? They are the first in terms of embedding values on people. They are the very own place where we start off to learn values from them, in terms of going back to reclaim those values. I haven't heard about our various homes or households and what are their roles. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about the role of mothers in terms of food security. They are the ones who are the major ones to ensure that.
Thank you. I think you heard all that question. And on that note, I'd ask all the panelists if you want to say your final comments to this panel before we move on to the other panel. Maybe Simi, you want to have something to say about that and your final comments and on the question of the way forward?
Thank you very much. Your question is quite deep. How do we filter down the values, inculcating of the values in the households from the macro divisions, institutions, the organizations, the churches? I think of it as a plant. For this to grow, it needs the seedlings, but for the seedlings to be correct, to grow correct, to germinate properly, the tree needs to be also in the right conditions. If we have the wundi, we can't have the bengani beside it. What I'm trying to say is, sometimes we are expecting this little sapling, but what is growing, the condition is different, is alien, if I may. So bringing it down to the family, we cannot expect the families, let me put it in a positive way, for families and the values to filter down, it needs to be articulated at this level, the macro level. Whether it's churches, whether it's NGOs, whether it's a government, it needs to be, because the more people hear about it, which is why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because the philosophy or the belief is, before we speak, we need to listen more. So the listening is already inbuilt, but the information needs to be collaborated on how, why these values matter in this day and age.
I find it hard to forget that, the Vundi and the Baingani, Simi. But Shashi, it's come back really. We are relying on our people, our values, but really it's about people. And I think we have to have a system that puts, wherever it is, the people have to be front and center.
I think for the West, what you see is, when something strikes hard, and in the first few months people thought, oh, things will get back to normal. The tendency is for us to shrink and start getting, look more and more within. But we do have abundance of food, and this country doesn't need to go through a food crisis like we are going. And it comes back to what Simi said in terms of leadership. I think everybody can be a leader in their own space, whether it's a family, religious institutions, at the council levels, and we need to see much more leadership, much more accountability in terms of how our people are going to survive. And we need to be thinking long term. We know the global situation. We know where our economy is going or not going in the next 6 months. What does it really look like? So growing, we need to relook at local foods which were there, traditions, preservations, and how do, in the last sect I had said that in the West we see a lot of highly qualified people. We have engineers and we have, lots of people with great technological mind. And we have great traditional food systems. I think it's a time where we create spaces where technology is actually able to look at food, and not only food, values, system, leadership, the way it was, and how do we merge the two to create a bigger solution? For example, I'm saying, we need to be thinking, what are we manufacturing? Some of the food systems, since you mentioned wundi, plantains can be, beautiful, dried. It tastes like fig when you sun-dry it, Lumi. There's a lot of things which I think the brains now can marry and evolve commodities out of it as well as food security. So I think we need to create much more space for innovation, for thinking, for leadership with very strong values.
Thank you, Sashi. I think good point. Creating that space and making it thrive, trying to match it.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that a way forward? I know
I
very deep conversations going on here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I certainly agree with Sashi, and I think there's a lot of talent out there that our people have, and a lot of skills that could be repurposed for addressing some of the challenges that we have. And I think technology could certainly play an important role in that, in doing that by providing that type of space digitally. But I think you also need physical spaces where people can come together and ideate and come up with new ideas and new solutions. I think it comes back down to collaboration, and a lot of it comes back down also, I think, to realizing that data is important, that we need to capture it if we are able to effectively do anything to address this pandemic. And so that's basically it.
Mary, one of your key points also that you mentioned involved digital.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want active, constructive participation from the community at all levels. And technology is rarely used in that space. So I know Kenneth, with the work that he does, let internet be part of the whole process. Right now it's only paper and verbal submissions. If councils can accept online submissions and things like that, that's an added bonus because more people can contribute. My underlying thought is the power of community. We need to just, the virus has done it. We need to peel back and just start afresh with things that were lying dormant, the knowledge that we have, and just be more welcoming of traditional stuff, technology, merge it together and move on. There's so much opportunity out there.
So much opportunity out there, and then that brings our first panel of the season 1 finale to a close. Thank you very much, Simi, for the food for thought. Shashi, Kenneth, and Mary. Don't go away. We'll be right back with our next panel. We'll take a short break, and the finale continues. Welcome back to the second panel of the season finale of Reset Fiji. We've heard from those, the first panel of those who were in the front line, but now we'll hear from panelists who have experience, who can give advice on how we mobilize, organize communities, and build on the tremendous goodwill and resources of our people to enable partnerships. Glad to have back with me Jody Smith of Matanataki, Masilatinara from Habitat for Humanity and the Fiji Bamboo Association, and Lavinia Kometotoa from Pacific Island Farmers Organization. Jody, I'd like to start with you. You talked about financing and the opportunities that exist in this space, especially now, after COVID-19 and during this pandemic. So, where are these opportunities? Where do they exist in terms of investment, financing, and other areas that people of Fiji may not know about but can take advantage of?
So I think before we get to answering that question, we actually need to look at the long-term macroeconomic vision for the country. So we need to create a vision for Fiji which recognizes that global value chains are actually over. So countries they're reshoring their manufacturing. They're replacing cheap offshore labor with automation. This has been happening in Europe since the global financial crisis, 2008. We also need to really recognize that tourism as we've known it may never occur again. So we really need to reorient. So this vision for Fiji, this macroeconomic vision, it needs to have implementable strategies and tactics. And this has to deliver self-reliant, non-disruptive, environmentally balanced, and a long-term circular economy. So from the perspective of private sector business, how can these business innovators contribute to that vision? First thing that we can do in the private sector is that we can look inward. So we need to ask, what are the resources that we have in Fiji? What can we extract sustainably? Because let's face it, humans are consumers. But what can we extract sustainably in a way which regenerates the environment and honours the values we were talking about in the first panel? What things will give us self-reliance and will also give us high-value surplus which we can export? Secondly, we need to look outward. We need to ask, what do people need and want globally that is uniquely Fijian, that is of high value and technologically cutting edge? And I don't mean high tech necessarily. This can be low tech, but we do need technology. And this could even be the ancient technology we were talking about in the first panel. Thirdly, we need to innovate these products and services, and we need to build the business case. So we need to make financial and environmental projections, and we need to validate the market before we do anything. Make sure the market is actually there. There are many mistakes that we've seen in business in Fiji where people go ahead, launch into a business, there's no market. So finally, we need to be able to approach potential investors. So this, what I've just described, is investment readiness, and this costs money. We need to be able to mobilize public sector money to pay for this. And once we can do that, we can unlock the private capital. And how much is actually there? Well, last year there was $1.5 trillion available for blue and green investments, and there was $502 billion available for impact investment. So now I've sort of set a stage of what we need to do to get ready for this investment. What are the opportunities that I can see here in Fiji right now? Well, there are certainly opportunities and innovations in the waste sector. So we can do construction work and operations of sanitary landfills, material recovery facilities. We could look at Fiji becoming a hub for the Pacific, for Australia and New Zealand, to do upcycling. The consortium that I work with, we've actually been able to arrange impact investment for such a solution for the West. And interestingly, I only discovered this the other week, we're able to fund rehabilitation of old dump sites through financial innovation. So we can sell carbon credits to countries like Sweden, Norway, Switzerland. They will buy the carbon credits when we rehabilitate old dump sites. I also see innovation potential in the sugar and coconut industry. So I talked earlier about non-disruptive. We don't want to say to all the sugarcane farmers, you now have to become prawn farmers, or something that they've never done before. So we need to be non-disruptive. Let's keep sugarcane farmers producing sugar, but let's find some technological and financial innovations that can help them move forward. So for example, there's new technology around fermenting sugarcane, and this creates a healthy option. We can also look at biofertilizers. We can look at high quality ethanol. And these sorts of things can be funded using foreign export credits. So the countries that want to buy, they can provide the credits to create these innovations and these business evolutions. There's also potential for coastal innovation and coastal protection products. There's a company that we are working with who create these, they're like concrete blocks, but they have these little spaces where marine life can grow. And these are made from recycled materials. So these can be used for seawalls, for riverbank protection, but they can be manufactured in country. So here we're talking local jobs, we're talking technology transfer, and we're talking academic cooperation. I was talking to Marcy earlier about the potential for a pension fund to actually be the source of investment for the social housing projects. So what is needed and what are the gaps? I think we really need action groups. We've talked a lot about communities. So let's get politicians, civil servants, private sector, investors, academia, the civil society organisations, community and experts who can really help us or guide in the creation of these new models. We need time managers, we need people who can really drive this and keep us on target. And really crucially, we need government support to unlock this public money that I've mentioned. We need government also to partner in PPPs, and government needs to provide infant industry protection. That's it from me for now.
It's quite a very thorough, practical, and so many good ideas there. I just wanted to ask a few questions about them. That money that you say that's available, because we right now in this country know we don't have much money for investment, for infrastructure. That money, where is it parked? I mean, where do they exist? Where do we go for it, for instance?
So the investors that we're working with are largely in Europe, but we have some investors in Asia as well. I mentioned in the last panel I was on BlackRock. This is the largest fund manager in the world. They are shifting their entire portfolio to focus on sustainability. So Fiji can really orient itself very well in order to be able to access, but this is largely from the developed countries.
And this funding, these are loans? So how do they work?
Correct. There are different financing mechanisms. So some of it is debt, some can be equity, some can be a combination of both, some can be guarantees against loans. There are lots of different financing mechanisms, and the work that we do at Matanataki is really to support the businesses to do their financial projection, to ensure that they're able to pay back or to take on the equity and to have long-term sustainability in their business.
Okay, I'll come back to some more questions later. Let's move on to because I think that is really something that we need to explore, given what's taking place right now. I just want to come to you, Masi. The government, one of the very popular things in the budget has been the incentives for people to go into housing, to buy their first home. I think it's 20,000 and 30,000, or could be more. 50,000, yes, for first-time home buyers, for those earning below 50,000, yeah. So I wanted to talk about, incentives are great, but how do we secure affordable, sustainable, durable housing for our people at this time, apart from incentives such as this? What kind of solutions do you see us looking at, given the situation that we are facing now?
Thank you, Stanley. Before I answer that question, again, I'd like to set a scene as well. Something we discussed at the last time I was on this panel was the need for affordable housing, but also accessible housing. And I talked about accessible technology and how the building code right now is very restrictive when it comes to technologies available to all Fiji citizens. When we had Cyclone Winston, over 30,000 homes were damaged or destroyed in Fiji. The majority of those homes were for families that fit this income bracket, below 50, and these are the families that are going to be affected every time there is a cyclone, because of the way our construction industry is set up and the cost to build. So what can we do to bring in something that's accessible and affordable, right? Even with the subsidies from government, people still can't build for the amount of funding that government will be providing. They still have to get a loan, right, on top of that. Because the cost of building a house in Fiji, according to the building code, is very expensive. It's going to be out of reach for a lot of the families that fit this income bracket. So we still need to, and I still believe very strongly that we still need alternative technologies for Fiji. Now, and this is where, I'm so grateful that these conversations are happening, and Reset Fiji is creating these conversations and offshoot conversations like this, because we need to be inward looking. Small countries have a tendency when it comes to technology to look outside for direction, but we need to look inward. Simi earlier, in an earlier panel, was talking about our traditions. We have so much here in Fiji that we can do to reduce the cost of housing, and I'm talking specifically here about bamboo. Bamboo is not, it's not a new idea, it's not a fad, it's not a fashionable thing that will go out of fashion. Just to drive that point home, in 2019, the global bamboo market was worth US $72 billion. It's expected in 2020 to be $75 billion and to grow to $98 billion in 2027, so not very far away. So it's a very fast-growing market, and Fiji is perfect for using bamboo in housing, but also in other sectors. Now, to go back to what do we need to do in Fiji to be able to bring bamboo into the building construction industry? I can speak from the residential perspective because of the work that we do at Habitat for Humanity. What we see is that families in the income brackets that we focus on, which is under 20,000, they are always in a state of emergency when it comes to housing because of the cost of building. What we need to do is look at how to bring bamboo into the building code. And I've recently had conversations with people at Ministry of Industry, and there is a lot of interest to bring bamboo into the building code there.
So what's in the way?
So I think there needs to be funding to do research. So with bamboo, when it comes to the building industry, you need to have predictable supply. You need to have standardized units as far as cost and structure. I'm talking about structural, as far as strength goes, so that you can design houses in a predictable way. Right now, when you take bamboo out of the plantation, it's not that predictable, right? Every bamboo stalk is different. So Ministry of Industry is very interested to look at that.
So, sorry, I wanted to ask a question, because bamboo is great, but what about our timber? You know, why is housing expensive when we should be having a lot of timber, local timber in the country, for instance? What's the difficulty or what's making things hard in that regard? I know bamboo, yes, is a solution. I'm not sure about how much supply is there, but we also have timber. Why can't Fiji have timber to supply the local market for housing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Timber, we do have very good timber in Fiji. The radiata pine that we grow in Fiji is quite dense, very strong compared to the pine that comes out of New Zealand. However, we've seen in the past, when there's a disaster, the industry cannot, the timber supply industry cannot keep up with the demand. And so you may have seen that container loads, shipping container loads of timber is brought in from New Zealand, mostly New Zealand, to meet the demand. As a result, it replaces the timber in Fiji at a lower cost, actually. You can bring timber into Fiji from New Zealand at a lower cost, landed. So the industry is not supported by the local market, you know. But again, it's just, I mean, I don't know what exactly the square meter rates of construction are, but they are out of reach. They are $700 to $1,000 and upwards a square meter to build a house. And if you think about these families that are 50,000, have a combined household income of $50,000 and less, it's really difficult for them to service a loan and build a house, you know, that's adequate for their family. Yeah.
So bamboo is a solution that you have alternative sources to look
Yes,
at.
absolutely. Yeah.
Great. I think leave it at there because there's been some great points you've brought out from there, Marcy, and I really appreciate that because I think people get carried away in saying, "Oh, so nice! Now there's support for housing," not realizing that you still have to go to the bank. We have so many conditions for you to try to secure a loan and be able to get to that level and get some relief in terms of that area. I just bring Lavinia in because now due to this pandemic and the economic situation, gardening has never been more fashionable, never been more, you know, just so popular right now. Even I got into it. And people are going back. I mean, some of us, for many people, it's really out of necessity. And yeah, we can say it's joke, but for a lot of people, this was really, they had to plant something. In a few months, they would starve. And many are now realizing how to make use of all available spaces around their house. And then we talked about in the first panel, food security, a key future. But then there's the issue of, you know, how do we plant? And I found out that a lot of people, when they were given these seeds, started to Google how do you plant cabbage, you know, and things like that. So this is a real issue. And my question to Pacific Island Farmers Organization Network, where do people go to get that to get the seeds? Where do they go for the training? And where can people find the support they need to have sustainable gardening and not just like a fashionable statement?
Thank you, Stanley. I think normally the traditional way, one would go to the Ministry of Agriculture. You have HOPTI, you have MHs, you even have some hardware. That's where people traditionally go for seeds. Today, the new norm is nurseries. I know since COVID-19, many backyard nurseries have also come up. So it's really, really interesting. Like for us in our sector, it's something that we've been trying to teach. You know, let's get backyard gardening, and COVID has done that for us. But in saying that, Stanley, let's not stop. Let's continue to do it. So where else can you look to? So for us, we have farmer organizations. In Nandi, we have Nature's Way Cooperative. They sell seeds, fertilizers. There's South Pacific Fertilizers in Lotoka. There's Bula Agro, who's also our member. In Taviuni, I know we have Tete Taviuni and Tutu Rural Training Center. And Tete Taviuni worked with us last year. Now they've got nurseries, about 10 nurseries around Taviuni, because traditionally in Taviuni, people would come to Vanolevu, buy their seeds and go across. So now that's starting to come in. Vanolevu, they have that link with the Tutu Rural Training Center, so they get their planting materials from there. But more exciting for me is what I've seen since COVID. Barter for Better Fiji, the barter pages, and you see people bartering planting material, nurseries. There's social media. There's quite a few pages that you can sign in on. There's networks, there's backyard gardeners, there's a Fiji Seedling Network where you can go in and you can ask. And surprisingly, some of them are just around the neighborhood. But I think it needs to start with ourselves, really. And if someone is good and they've realized that they've got green fingers, then, do more seedlings, and that can be your small business initiative, and start. That's one way of doing it. If you're a farmer, another way to tap is to reach out to farmers. Farmers have plentiful material. My farm example, I had to drive to Rakiraki to get my yellow kumala planting material, but I've got it. You pick up the phone, good old traditional way. You tap people, and you go to the market, and there is sources of information around. I think the best sources of information is you just look around yourself. You have your family, you have your workmates, you have the church. When you sit and discuss as a group, as a cluster, people will say, so-and-so has this, so-and-so has that. And again, this is really this is how we've operated anyway in the past, and I think it's just renewing that, and then following up and doing it yourself as a group, organizing, and then searching for that. And then there's backyard gardens, there's nurseries. There is also apps. We had Kenneth on the panel before us. He's got his Traceable Farm app. As a farmer, I've downloaded that app. And you can do your profile, but there is information in there. There's also links in there that you can connect. So again, that's quite exciting. Videos. Recently, we've produced videos by our members. Simple videos that we never thought that we would do. How to prepare soil, how to sow a seed. We're going to continue to do orchids, farming, pest management, disease management. So those videos are coming out. But if you look in YouTube, there's heaps of information out there that you can look at. But I'm encouraging everyone, when you look at it and when you're looking at it, learning from it, make sure that you're localizing it in the local context. My father always taught me, an expert was once a beginner. Practice made her perfect. So you continue to plant. And don't stop at just the seedlings and the cabbages. Let's do the mbele. Let's do the mother. You can get the mbele from the market, go buy your mbele, and then from one stalk, cut it into 3, you got 3 mbele. It's simple, it's effective, but another great place for information is the market. Go to the market vendors, the market sellers, they can tell you where to get the seeds from, and that's another place. And just learning from other farmers. There's an initiative that we're doing on agritourism where we're trying to work with some farms to make them farm ready. And so now that everyone's doing backyard gardening, I hope that when these farms are farm ready for visitors, then people can visit farms. Just walking the farm is a great way to learn. We call it, in our sector, we call it farmer-to-farmer exchange, or farmers helping farmers.
Yeah, farmers helping farmers. I think it was a great concept from our panel. One thing I want to just to ask about is some tips, because if this situation continues, there's a lot of people who are thinking they've lost their jobs, they really need to move beyond backyard gardening and into farms. What would be the advice, the process to do that?
Good question. I've been asked that many times. You know what? Start backyard farming first and master it. And farming is like what Wasing said, you don't turn it on overnight. It's a learning process over years. I've been farming for 10, 15 years. I'm still a novice to many farmers. There's land available. One of the first places that you can go to is TLTB, or you're looking for farms in the papers, and then that's how you purchase a farm. There's many, I know since COVID, many have gone back to their villages. And not only in the West, Vanolevu, Tavyuni, we've heard stories of how people have gone back. But when people go back, please, when they go back, they need to assimilate themselves well back into their villages, into their societies. And don't bring the attitude from the city back into the villages. You need to assimilate, work with the system that's there in the village, in the community, to then get your piece of land and start.
Great advice. Jody, I'd like to come to you because the idea is so cutting edge, but you also said that we have some cutting edge sectors here in the country. What would be some of these cutting edge that we have that we can make use to jump in what would some would say the big league, so to speak, because we're talking about big investments, correct? It is?
We're looking at investments of different sizes, so we certainly acknowledge that there are many SMEs that need investments between 500,000 and 5 million. Then there are a handful of businesses that could take bigger investments in that 10 million and upwards. Always when we're looking at a sector, we look at how can we bring the maximum value across that sector. So I'll give a couple of examples. So I mentioned earlier in sugar. There are some new sugar fermentation techniques that have come out. In fact, they're probably not new, they're probably quite old. But the Gates Foundation did some research, and they've come up with a technique of fermenting sugar. And the fermentation creates a healthy sugar. So this is a sugar which has no calories, it doesn't have the side effects which lead to obesity, which lead to diabetes. So can we look at how we could bring that kind of technology here? And as I understand it, it's actually quite simple. In coconut, so when we're thinking here of coconut, we think of things like virgin coconut oil. There's a way that you can fraction out the medium chain triglycerides which are in the coconut oil, and these actually have a much higher value, and they can be fractioned out quite simply. So it's just a case of, well, it's not just a case, and I'm not the expert here, but boiling the oil and then taking out these fractions of these triglycerides. And we can sell these for more. So these are the sorts of things that we want to look at doing, and what products can they go into.
Okay, great. We have 2 questions. I'll take 2 questions for this panel. Yeah.
Bulavinaka, my name is Sivendra Michael and I'm a PhD student at the University of Auckland. And my question is, just before I put out the question, it's just to share some facts as well, is about SME. And you spoke about, Jody, you spoke about protection against infant industries and PPP in accessing these grants. And as researchers, we know that policies constantly draw attention to the private sector with a complete closed eye on micro and small businesses. And I want to ask you about the fact that there is a perception of how they can even access global financial grants or incentives when they can't even access their local markets, financial institution or financial incentives in the local market. They are always off the criteria to benefit from anything, and insurance being another commodity, we know that there is micro-bundle insurance programs for farmers, but there is nothing as such for micro and small businesses. So my question to you is, from an economic point of view, waiving tax incentives and stamp duties is not going to aid much of the businesses. So what form of support can organizations such as yours provide to businesses that are an integral part of our livelihoods?
So one of the innovations that we've come up with is to create an investment vehicle, so essentially a facility which is targeted at SMEs. So when you invest into a business, you have quite high transaction costs on a single investment. So what we're wanting to do is we say to the investors, all right, pull your money into the single investment vehicle, which we'll manage for you. You're on the investment committee, investors, so you make the ultimate decision, but we will manage the investments. And because it's all pooled into one facility, we can make smaller investments into businesses. So I think that is an innovative way in order to get that money to the SMEs. Now, another really key thing is to provide the business support. One of the big bottlenecks that we've seen is that businesses here often lack the experience that you need in order to, to know about what are these complex financial instruments that you can access. So that's where we look at providing that support. So working on the business model, working on the financial projections, and then when the investment is received, we're really the support on the ground for the businesses, as well as monitoring the investments for the investors. And we also monitor the environmental impact.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
Thank you, Charlie. My question is again to you, Jody. It's building on what Michael has mentioned, the notion of PPP. We've been hearing this concept in the past decades. Building on the last panel, the need to include community and the need to look inward to raise financing. My question is, how do you bring another P into that 3P, the people? If you look at it within the context of Fiji, where majority of the population owns the resources, how do you leverage this, the fact that we own our resources, community owns their resources, how do you bring them into that model in terms of enabling Fiji to raise the finance inward, domestically in relation to their development agendas? Naka.
So I would say in this instance, PPP doesn't actually need to include the public, doesn't need to be the inclusion of government. This could be done entirely as a private endeavour. So these are some of the ideas we're trying to innovate. So can we take, let's say, an existing state-owned enterprise? Can we develop that business? Can we give the producers or the suppliers into that state-owned enterprise some ownership in that business? And then as milestones are met in terms of return on the investment, actually give more shares to the people who have been providing into that business. So I think, yeah, these would be the types of things we're looking to do to really bring ownership back to the owners of the resources.
Great. Masi, I wanted to bring you in on that because the building code is an issue in terms of the bamboo, but also the investment in bamboo will be required. Where do you see the resource we have now in bamboo, and how much more will be needed to make it what some would say viable?
Yeah, I mean, I think baby steps. Bamboo in Fiji building industry is used as a temporary or non-structural material, but it is very common, right? And familiar. There is lots of land in Fiji. Bamboo, different species of bamboo grow in different types of land. So there's a lot of opportunity there for people to grow bamboo. And that's where this material can be immediately accessible for people when you're looking at cost, right? But with regards to investment at, say, an industrial level, that's when you need to start talking with government and private sector and bringing that in with other countries that have already developed the industry, and there's countries like Indonesia and China, and with organizations like INBA who are focused on bringing bamboo to that industrial level, that are really actually willing to support countries like Fiji in that.
Thanks. Lavinia, farmers helping farmers, great concept, but where does the government come in? What's their role in terms of helping us, those that are wanting to move into farming or trying to make sure that they are food secure on their own at this stage? What role do they play?
Thank you, Stanley. Government plays a very critical role in terms of policy, and they need to ensure that there's policy in place that will help this to grow. Also in saying that, just the recent budget with agriculture. There was a decrease as opposed to many, but we expected a little bit more because agriculture is the norm now. But in saying that, there is a role that government plays still with the extension, with research, especially research, making sure that we have the right species, that the planting materials are multiplied and it's coming out, being given to key farmers, being given to key nurseries who can then multiply these and then give it out into the public. And that's a key role that government plays. And Sashi alluded to yams. You know, there's a lot of planting material out there, but we aren't harvesting it. Again, we need to ensure that these planting materials, these seeds, are accessible to those who are wanting to farm.
Thank you very much, Masi, Jody, and Lavinia. I think that's been that brings our second panel on the Reset Fiji finale to a close, and I think there's been some really great points. Thank you, panelists, on how do we mobilize and organize and get ourselves prepared to find the opportunities that are there that we may not be seeing at the moment, but we now have to explore and bring out as the opportunity has given us. That's our second panel done for season finale. Don't go away, we'll be right back with our final panel for the evening. Be right back. Welcome back. We are on to our third and final panel of the grand finale of season 1 of Reset Fiji. We've been focusing on big ideas and actions, and we have some big thinkers again here with us for the third panel on how we all need to begin the journey to transform and diversify Fiji's economy. James Sawane of Pacific Destinations, Ram Bajikal, FMF Foods Limited, and Wasing Yi, agriculturalist and popular commentator, Facebook runner, running and cycling all over the place with his dogs. James, I'll start with you. Tourism, obviously, it's been at the forefront of everyone's mind at this time, and it was the forefront of the government's mind. One can see when the budget was presented. It's we've been talking about all these bubbles and state of trying to ensure we follow all the protocols, everything that's required to get ready. But this is going on for quite some time. What will be needed for us to really be ready? Because our people have moved on. Some have moved on, haven't they? Into other things. They've gone into the farming, the backyard gardenings and the farming that we've talked about in the previous panel. So without them, it'll be very hard for the tourism industry to bounce back. And so how are you seeing this having to play out for us to go back to the tourism industry that we knew?
Stanley Mpula to everybody. Firstly, Stanley, thank you for grouping all of us with the same haircut for the last session. Secondly, it's a pleasure to be here in Suva. As I said before, it's always a privilege to be part of your Suva bubble, coming from the West. And firstly, I just wanted to say thank you to the government for a very good budget from our tour operators. And I know our colleague Fantasha Lockington had publicly acknowledged that, but from transport operators, from a tour operators viewpoint, we were very thankful for the stimulant budget that was announced. I mentioned in my last talk the importance of consultation, and I just wanted to highlight that and thank the Ministry of Economy with the Honorable Minister who took time to come out and listen to us and heard tour operators. I was in two sessions in the West, and we were invited to submit a joint submission, which a lot of it was taken on board. So again, the result of consultation is what came out of the budget. So we're very thankful. Also, I want to say thank you to the many, many Fijians who have supported the tourism industry in taking advantage of the local deals that have been promoted by our local hotel partners. It is fantastic to see so many Fijians from all over coming to enjoy not just our tourism product, but our world-class tourism product. And most of you probably would have, most of them, or if you haven't been, probably would have just driven past the Coral Coast or the Ndenarau hotels without stopping to your busy schedule. But for those of you that have experienced it, I'm sure you would have been very proud of what we have as a tourism destination. Stanley, I just wanted to put some context before I answer your question. Just going back to some basic scenarios, just so that everyone could understand. As a tourism industry, and for me as a transport operator, we have come out of our traditional low season every year. This is even pre-COVID. Our low season would start from November, and then we would pick up from 15th of December through to the 15th of January, and then it stops. That's when our major source markets, they start preparing for school. Then we go into the quiet months, very quiet months of January, February, and March. So traditionally, those are very low months. So this year was no different. And as a business, we had adapted our operations. Obviously, the costs do not change, but we all plan and anticipate the start of the peak season. Normally starts from April, from Easter onward. So this year was looking quite positive for a lot of tourism operators, including our business, but we never got there. So it is now 4 months. So if you count back, just to put some context to it, we're looking at about 8.5 months of the down period and of course the impact of COVID. And as I mentioned, none of the costs have changed. So that's the first context. The other context I wanted to just share is that recently, most of you would be aware, there was a survey that the IFC released for the month of July. And just some key findings was that 69% of tourism and non-tourism related businesses are in hibernation, 69. 20% of businesses are finding it very hard to service their debt obligations. I think a similar percentage, if nothing changes by November, are looking at closing their business. I think the number they derived was about 500 businesses using the sample. That's alarming. And so that's the context that I just wanted to start off with. However, they are businesses, we were part of the survey. We are not just going to roll over and give up. Those businesses would have given the state of their business then, but it just doesn't mean that they are giving up. We are giving up. That's far from it. Yes, there is no tourist to service, so we've had to adapt, and I think I've shared this in our last session. I think one of the main things is that the next stage now is that for us as tourism operators, and I speak confidently on our business, this is a time we are now just giving some time to reset, fully reset. 8.5 months has been really painful with no income at all. So we are just taking this time now to reset our own business. A lot of thinking, a lot of talking, a lot of consultation with our partners, with our staff. How do we come out of this? If we come out of this, how do we come out? Do we come out as a transport operator? Do we come out as a different type of operation? Is there a niche within the transport sector that we can find? So with that context, of course, we have the people in terms of our the different sectors. One thing that we must not forget, and let's turn this into a positive, is that the 100,000+ tourism-related workers who have lost their jobs or sent on long-term leave, we must always remember that these are workers who are very skillful. They are workers who have dealt at international level 7 days a week, pre-COVID, servicing tourists from all over the world and delivering that service level that is expected of a tourism destination like Fiji. So it is not all doom and gloom. From the hotel sector, I know there's a lot of tradespeople who have found other alternative means. From our sector, from transport, our drivers, and I can say confidently, are one of the most highly trained drivers in the country. I say that confidently. So in keeping in touch with our drivers for our business, some of them have gone back to local bus driving, taxi driving, and other maybe goods and services delivery. I am happy, the positive I take out of it is that the transfer of skill is now going out to the community. We have a very highly skilled workforce that's now redeployed. They are not giving up. We stay in touch, and Ken mentioned earlier in terms of using of technology, we stay in touch with our team members like most companies in Fiji through our own Viber groups, and they keep us updated. So I think the main thing is there's no sense of sorrow, there's no giving up. The spirit is very alive in the West. And I just wanted to reiterate that. Once our businesses reset and given time to reset, then we will find what is the void, what is required as far as human resources. So I think that's going to take a bit of time. And now with the moving target of the pandemic, we have some time, but we must remain positive in the state of preparedness. Yes, protocol has been developed. The Ministry of Health has developed a set of guidelines, which in our own different set of businesses, we have developed our protocols. And in that state, we are almost ready. The hotels opening for locals gives them a chance to implement some of those protocols. So I think for us as to recognize that we are able to pass on skills, international level skills, to the rest of the economy, yes, people will adjust. And I think in the same way, we have to allow people to adjust. We have to, yes, there's a lot of help, but we need to allow people to find their ground zero also. Then they make their reset decisions. I mentioned earlier the importance of consultation. They need to consult with their own family groups, and they decide, do they come back to the tourism industry? Have they found a niche in their skill that they'd like to continue?
So everyone's making adjustments.
Everyone's making adjustments.
You sound very positive, James, but there are the doom and gloom predictions and scenarios. How are you as an operator looking at this, and people talking about, okay, we've put so much money, 400 and something million, into keeping Fiji Airways alive until, say, next year. And these incentives and this support that the government has given you, yes, it'll go quite a bit into assisting at this stage. But I'm sure you're not hiding away or putting your head in the sand from the doom and gloom predictions that are out there. How do you see that and balance that with your positive and what you think is coming, and how you're trying to find the balance to say, I will stay alive to manage that cliff or that dangerous rocks that we're navigating through right now?
Vinaka, I think it's very important, regardless of what is said in the media, I think it's very important that we have a very strong and viable national carrier. I think that is the first thing I wanted to say, and we as an industry, we recognize and support that. So, on your question, for the other thing I want to say is, as an industry, we are not sitting still. There is a tourism recovery team, which is made up of public and private sector, and I'm very honored to be part of that. We meet on a weekly basis, and we discuss the current trends and what to expect. So we give advice to government agencies that's formulating various policies, so that's ongoing. Through Fiji Airways, they are spearheading a task force made up of the greatest heads in tourism, tourism practitioners, to come up with a deal to take advantage of what has been announced in the budget. So there's work being done every day, every moment for that, that positive outlook when borders will open. To the team alone, and I say this, and I'm repeating myself, and I say this to my team, and I say this to people who have lost their jobs, this is the time when you create your legacy. Either you give up or you stand up and you fight for your survival. So I always say to my team that in 15, 20 years' time, what do you want your children to say of you? Were you a parent that gave up? Or were you a parent that fought for me? So I think with that kind of spirit, we can get through this. We are not, if we're going to sit back and feel sorry, and nothing's going to happen. We have to get up, get off our bums, and do something. So that is the spirit I hope will transcend throughout, even though we're finding it tough in the West.
It's been the spirit that's been getting many through at this time. Wonderful points from you, James. Ram, in that spirit, how do we build this economy? Basically, a system is that we've been sort of has sort of broken a bit. It's crippled at the moment. So how do we build out of this an economic of solidarity between companies, industries, between those that have wealth, between those that have resources, the resource owners, those that have land, to shoulder the burden of recovery, and building on that spirit from that James talked about, to ensure we do not allow this to make the situation worse, to the inequality gaps that are there not to get further exacerbate. So how do we, you're in the corporate sector, and how are you seeing all these and the opportunity that you see that we can take on now to move us forward?
Thank you for that question, Bula, Stanley, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really inspired by James's confidence, and I know that that's echoed by a lot of people, and that is just the kind of positivity that is required. Otherwise, you'll keel over very easily. As far as the business sector is concerned, I think there is quite a bit on our plate at the moment. The budget that just went, which was clearly driven towards propping up the tourism sector. Some other sectors might feel a little weary about it because what is clearly seen is that there seems to be an opening up of the economy more towards trading than local manufacture, and there is sometimes a concern about what that could entail in terms of manufacturing jobs, and will we add to the already unemployed 118,000 if manufacturing goes. But I think the question that really needs to be looked at is what's good for the nation. And when you talk about solidarity, I think this is really what one needs to look at. While trading opportunities have opened up in order to make things cheaper for the tourism sector to be able to provide inputs at lower prices to visitors, people who are doing so need to ensure or look at a few things. One is, again, from a solidarity perspective, why am I importing something if that's locally available? Am I doing so in order to provide a lower cost input to my visitors and to my business so that I can pass on the benefits to the consumers and make it competitive for us as a nation, for people to come here? Or am I merely doing it because I have promise of greater margins as an intermediary? And I think that is important, because if people are looking at it as, hey, here's an opportunity for me to make more money by importing cheaper goods, I think we're missing the point. The benefit has to pass down to the sectors that is meant to benefit, and that's meant to be to the visitors, and therefore making the sector competitive. But what I would really like to have seen is a bit of, and that's something that we probably need to look at, what's the direction that the budget is seeking to set Are we going to be henceforth a far more open economy? And many countries have done that to great advantage. So is that the direction that we're going to take? And if that is indeed the case, what is going to come with it? Because I think there needs to be a bit of balancing out. And when we're looking at inequities or resilience or proneness to impacts such as what has happened now with the pandemic, what do we need to do to make the country more resilient? And clearly, one thing that we look at, which will also help bring about more equity, is economic diversification. Now, that needs to be seen in the budget. While the budget does lay out certain things on SOPs, for instance, lower duties on import of machinery and things like that, what we did not see. And I think the government is really looking at saying different sectors can pick from these advantages that have been passed on and build that sector. But sometimes it's actually necessary to spell out which sectors we want to promote. Agriculture, fisheries, forestries, port and maritime services. In Singapore, 7% of their GDP comes from maritime services. IT-enabled services, if you look at BPO sector, 17% of Philippines' economy is built on that. It's a $22 billion industry. We have a young country, and some of the countries like Vietnam have been speaking about challenges they face, mainly being soft skills not available to build and grow the BPO sector to at the pace at which they want them. What can we do? How can we take advantage of that? What do educational institutions need to do to facilitate that into building soft skills into students as they come by, into enabling them to participate in the BPO sector? What is Investment Fiji doing with regard to specifically promoting this sector in markets where we have potential? So I think these are some of the sort of things that we would need to start looking at. And to have such a thing happening, again, solidarity, I think the issue is what we need is conversations. And I'm so thankful to this forum and my TV and the partners that have sponsored that Reset Fiji is happening, because I think we should be talking, there's an opportunity to talk reset, not just relief. Relief is instant. We're talking about resetting the economy for going forward so that what has happened now as a result of this doesn't happen again, or if it does, the impacts are not so heavy on the people. So when we're looking at conversations, I think Jody put it out very succinctly and elaborately. She kind of put out all the sectors that need to be conversing. And what we need are genuine conversations and dialogue. We don't need diatribes where people just come and blast things. We also don't need unilateralism where somebody thinks that they have all the solutions, and that's very patronizing. We need conversations to happen, because then intelligentsia comes in, community comes in, everybody that has a stake in it comes in and contributes towards what can be done to reset the nation going forward. And spaces like this would allow that to happen. And then there's, of course, solidarity between organizations, companies working together to reset the economy, to relieve what's happening now. And that can happen where there's relationships, where there's supply chain relationships, which helps better. Otherwise, sometimes you're too busy competing and trying to kill each other rather than cooperating and helping to boost the nation as a whole. And this can happen if directions are set into which way we want, what do we want to prioritize. Therefore, when budgets get built bottom up, saying, me as an example, the Ministry of Agriculture, we have a program for, let's say, encouraging the mushroom sector. And this is our plan. We've got a dossier, we've got a laid out plan. Now this would require an investment of, just an example, $50 million. Now that's a bottom-up planning. And therefore, when you then allocate a sum of $50 million into that, there is accountability saying this has been allocated for this specific purpose and we want it to be fulfilled and to be executed properly. Whereas if you just say so much is allocated for the agricultural sector, and if there is no concrete bottom-up plan that actually accounts for every single cent that's been allocated, sometimes you don't know where that money is spent. And what is intended may not happen. So I think these sort of conversations would probably assist in boosting this.
That's really great points, Ram, because the direction and the plan are pretty key in terms of this reset. And I'll bring Wa in now because we all talked about diversification. Agriculture was talked about heavily as the one that, while tourism is on the ropes at the moment that we can work to, but we can see that the transition is not an easy one. It's not a simple move as one would think it is. So how are you seeing things at this stage, Wa?
Well, thank you, Stan. Well, I've started out as a farmer, and I've moved on to other areas of business, including wholesale, retail, and manufacturing at one time, and also real estate. So I have sort of a broad perspective on all the industries except probably tourism. But I think for the last few years, we've been lulled into a sense of complacency, relying on tourism and also largely remittances. The boys playing rugby all over the world, and boys in the British Army, and caregivers in the United States of America. Someone said earlier to me, I think a few years back, they said, why should I produce coconut when I get a guy from overseas to pay me just to sit under my coconut tree? I mean, we had it, why not? We had it very good. And I think this COVID-19 pandemic is a wake-up call on how vulnerable we are as a nation for financial inflows and so on. But in saying that, our vulnerability from financial setbacks, Fiji is probably the best place in the world for us to, as James said, hibernate a little bit. For those of you who fly, to Singapore and Hong Kong, and you come to land into these high-skyscraper, tall buildings in Hong Kong and Singapore, imagine how much work is there, what they're doing to maintain that city. If somebody hibernates and goes to sleep, say for 5 years, you wake up and the city will be a mess. In Fiji, as you come back to Nandi and you look at the blue ocean and the greenery, the lovely land underneath, I can easily imagine that we can go to sleep for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe a bit longer, and we wake up and nothing much has changed. Especially some of the islands like in Kandavu, whether it's anybody from Kandavu here. And then life will continue as usual. And the strength of our nation lies in the resilience of our nation lies in our environment, our good climate, and our connection to the land. But what I fear now, I suppose in other crashes, say 20, 40 years back, is our connection to the land is not as strong now. When the similar events happened in the past, families had members who were farmers, who were in the villages, who could offer support. Their houses in the rural areas they can go back to when they lose their job in the city. Now I find that a lot of these connections are weakened or not there at all. And I built Garden City over the last 3 years, and I had about 150 workers. And while they were busy, everything was all right in the city. But now I get calls almost every day asking for work. And the calls, who calls me? The people who call me are not the Fijian Taukei workers up in Naitasiri or in Koro, because they are happily back in their, in their villages and settlements, sustaining themselves happily. They have their touch rugby in the afternoon and swimming and a bit of planting. They are okay. But the people who call me are mostly Indo-Fijians living in the settlements outside in Watuanga and Rewanga here. So this is the vulnerability that we have got to ourselves today. It's our connection to the land is weakened, and then we need to maintain that. Even if the crisis is over, I think this is a wake-up call. Now, the question is, I think Stan, you asked that. How do you prevent people, who are enthusiastic about agriculture now and going back to their villages, starting back up gardening and so on? How do you make them, carry on with that and not come back to the, not all of them to give up that and come back to the city as soon as the pandemic is over? Because this might happen again. And one of the questions, and I think one of the comments a lot of people has been talking about is there enough money given in the budget to the agriculture sector? And opposition members in parliament have said there's not enough, too much is allocated to tourism and so on. Well, to put it in black and white, if you say, is there enough funding in the current budget to the agriculture department, I would say there's probably enough money for them. But the way that it's been utilized, in fact, the last 3 years, if you look at it, the budget has remained roughly the same, around about 60, I think it was 61, 64, I think this year is about $65 million. And about half of that actually goes into operational wages, just paying the wages of the workers in the civil service, the cost of their office and running their vehicles and so on. But how do you maintain this? What really needs to be done in the agriculture to strengthen it? It's actually not putting money into the agriculture sector programs as such, but money into the rural sector, money into improving services, in the rural sector, schools, health services, housing, as Masi said, in the rural sector, electricity and so on. Because unless you have those amenities, people will always come back to where life is easier. And I go to China quite often, over the last 20 years, I guess. If you go to a rural sector in China now, the services that have appeared, in the rural sector are factories, entertainment sectors, apartments, and so on. There's no longer the pull of the big cities like Hong Kong or so on. People are going back to their ancestral homes because everything is there. High-speed trains stop in your villages and so on. And I think this is the thing that we've got to remember, that the development of agricultural industry is dependent on people who are happy in the environment in the rural sector. Unless you have that, the woman will say, man, let's go. There's no plumbing here. So I'll stop at that and I will elaborate that on that later.
Well, I'm loving the positive feel from the panel. I think it's important at this stage, even when we reset, that we have a positive mindset into facing clearly and clear-eyed the challenges that we're facing. And before I take any questions, James, I just want to say, Wah is quite right. We had it good in many ways. Obviously people worked hard in the tourism, but we had it good. And this has been a wake-up call. Now you have to fight for every inch, so to reclaim ground back.
Thank you, Stanley. Talking to, just a point I want to make on that is, talking to some colleagues in the hotel industry, people who have particularly, where it's family owned, who have built up their resorts over the last 15, 20 years. And even for me, building up my business over 21 years, we're all asking the question, we've spent so much time and energy building up. Now with this COVID, do we have energy to keep pushing? And that's another key question that affects whether we bring people back. Is there, if you've sacrificed for the last 20 years to come to where you are now, COVID has pretty much brought us all back to ground zero. Is there energy in the tank for us to restart? So that's another critical question that most businesses are asking now, particularly family-owned businesses. So their decision impacts the workforce that they have employed. Thus the comment that the workforce or the people should not wait, just like should not wait for government assistance. They should reset and move on.
We cannot afford to just collapse.
Well, you have a choice.
Question? And if now you promised the question.
Yes. I thank you, Stanley. And I thank the three panelists for the excellent contributions they've each made. And I particularly like their setting, the idea that COVID-19, or whatever it is not so much a wake-up call, but an opportunity for the country to reset. And I like James' optimism and positivity. And I like Ram's idea of attention to local manufacturing and local industries. And Wasing, of course, he's a master at all these things. And I agree with him that the resilience of Fiji is dependent on its people and its environment. I was in a meeting in Tailevu yesterday, provincial council meeting, and I was amazed at the positivity and optimism that was conveyed at that meeting towards the government and how it would handle the COVID-19 and what it brings. But the problems, their concerns that they raised was similar to what Wasing is saying. They need water, they need electricity, they need roads, and they need markets. So my question is this: how do we put together all the excellent ideas that have emerged from the different panels that we've had so far? How do we then push that, move forward from that to those who will make decisions for us? Thank you.
Thank you. Ram, I'd like you to answer that, because you talked about that the conversations was needed, but conversations alone is not enough. How do we take it to the next level, as Andifina has asked?
Thank you for that question, Andifina. Very, very important point. I think the issue is that, as I mentioned, these conversations ought to be about point making, not point scoring. And if you look at these conversations, one very key stakeholder is missing here, and that's the government. And I think our next endeavor should really be about how do we engage the government into these conversations and make them a part of this, and allow them to know that the whole community, including the business community, is looking at this. Now, from a business perspective, and I can tell you that I will not be very popular after I make this statement with the business community. The thing is, if there is a dialogue and that there is a perception amongst the business community that we're being listened to, then I would dare believe that the business community would be far more willing to volunteer a number of initiatives that otherwise they might just keep close to their chest. And the government would probably need to mandate some of this in order for it to happen. And I'll give you an example. The Indian government has mandated corporate social responsibility. And it is now, under the Companies Act, statutory for companies that exceed a certain threshold, and that's on the net worth of the company, the turnover of the company, and the profit of the company, that they should invest a minimum of 2% of the preceding 3 years' net profits into corporate social responsibility activities. And that's monitored, and there are penalties if you do not. Now, what that has done is between 2014 and 2018, it has brought about a 47% increase in CSR activities amongst companies, totaling in 2018 to 1.42 billion US dollars worth. Now, corporates can come to the fore in these sort of things, and because it need not be it can be as a tax rebate, that instead of paying X% tax, you pay X minus 2 as tax, and the 2% you put in as a corporate social responsibility activity, which you will decide on through your own committees into sectors that the government specifies as needing investment on corporate. For instance, poverty alleviation, could be education, could be health, could be infrastructure, as Andy Finau has mentioned. And this will ensure that the work gets done, it's monitored by the private sector, and therefore there is a desire to complete it. And these are some of the things that can come forth. Even if it's not mandated, mere disclosure can be a very positive thing about businesses having to disclose what they have done in terms of social, corporate social responsibility.
Yeah. I'll come back to you. I'll just take two questions that's outstanding on the floor, and then we'll wrap up with this panel. So I'll take the 2 questions. Yeah, Faye?
Thank you very much, Filatau Kahotevi. My question really begin perhaps with a comment about the interesting notion of, as you say, Mr. Bajikal, you raised an interesting point about the community of businesses. You said a community of companies, and the notion of working together as companies together to be able to resolve an issue. And here I come to this point about the underlying cultural and values that undergird our communities and our nation sometimes is missing in the very economic models that we have. And so your point about coming together as a community of companies is an interesting one to begin to resolve the issue. And then, hence, my question to both my brother there, Wa, and also my brother James. How can we create these communities to be able to resolve those questions that you brought up, Wa? These communities, how can we work together as a community in a nation to begin to resolve those questions of marginalization of these very people who are in the urban setting? How can we create a community of businesses to begin to resolve the very issue of tourism that we've often said is always outside focused and not inside focused? How can we begin to use that notion of communities to begin to resolve and set forth a model of a society and a model of economy that suits us as Fijians?
Great.
Thank you.
The other question?
Thank you, Stanley, and thank you to all the panelists. I like your fighting spirit, James. Now to Vinay from the Farmer Plus program. My question is to Wa, around the power in subsistence or subsistenceness, if that's even a word. We've often talked about upgrading subsistence players in agriculture to becoming commercially driven. And I think the message from James is something that needs to be amplified a bit more further, not only to those that have lost their jobs, but even to those that still have their jobs, because they are dreading the day when that job will be taken away from them. If you look back into the history of agriculture, subsistence farming has always been the mainstay of our supply chain. You look back into the 60s, the 70s, when Fiji was up there in the banana industry, and even as we speak today in the cover industry, a lot of what we export overseas are those that are sourced from our subsistence farmers. But there hasn't been a lot of talk on how we can work within that subsistence framework to to upgrade or help them, and at the end of the day, still achieving what we ought to achieve within the commercial setup.
Thank you. Two great questions, and I think time is also caught up on us. So, as you answer your question, your final points too for the evening, and then we'll go through the other panels. Thank you.
You want me to answer that question on subsistence agriculture?
As well as FACE.
And FACE on the community
of companies.
Companies getting together. Well, I think first of all, on the question of the social problems that we have, we need to work together with the NGOs and the business communities, but it has to be led by good government policy. Without that, we are working in separate groups. That has to be banded together with good government policy, long-term strategy. That's the short answer. As for subsistence agriculture transformation into commercial, my point of view is that a strong subsistence, a strong village economy is the springboard towards commercial agriculture. Without a strong subsistence, our Fiji will be a very worse situation off now. If you look at other countries that are undergoing the similar problem with millions and millions of people out of job, snow outside, food banks and so on. But on the point of I just want to mention this on the budget, because somebody asked about the budget allocation on government, whether it's enough. I think what we need to look at, the government allocation on the budget every year is driven by a lot of things. And one of these things that drives government budget allocation is, of course, politics, especially around election time. But what we need to look at is how much private finance is actually going into the agricultural sector. And that's really the real story there, because unless people are investing in agriculture, there's actually no faith in it. And if you look at the figures, I've got some figures from about 18 months ago. The total outstanding loan lending into the business in Fiji is around 2018 is around about $7,500 million. $7,500 million. That's lending across the rural sector, tourism, everything. And the agricultural sector, non-sugar one is the total. It's only about $174 million. That includes sugar. And that's about like 2%. 2% of the money that the banks lend only goes to agriculture. And the government, if you compare sugar, government last year, the revised estimate, put in $112 million into the sugar industry, including helping out FSC. But what the commercial banks gave to sugar grain, $100,000. So when you look at, you follow the money from the private sector, you will see where the real you know, the real, whether their heart is or whether they say money talks. And it's quite glaring.
Thank you for that.
you.
That's a great point to end on. The money is not going in the direction that we think it should go. But that's for the leaders of the business community, the banks, and that comes to the question that Faye has asked, Ram.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when you look at these businesses, we have business associations where we all get together and usually represent industry, whether it's FCEF or FHTA, different organizations, Fiji Commerce. Now, most often these are associations that take up issues when there's something that's going against the industry. The point that I seek your asking is, why don't we do the same thing when it comes to taking up some good issues, proactive measure? And funnily, a lot of people who are members of various organizations are members of Rotary and other organizations doing the same kind of charity work. So you find the captains of industry being members of these associations and doing good work. I think there is nothing that really keeps it away. It's when there is direction, when there's conversations, that's when people come together and are willing to do something. If they feel excluded and feel on the side that they're really recipients of something, then there is no proactiveness. As a recipient, you're not proactive. If you're an equal sharing partner, then you're proactive into that. And I think that would be the way to instill that confidence in business, saying, hey, we're going to listen to you, do what is right, and the business will come to the table. So that's my take on it. As far as agriculture is concerned, my firm belief is that subsistence agriculture has a place, but as a sector of the economy, commercial agriculture has the opportunity and the need to take a far higher place in the economy. And as for what Wah Singh meant, I have mentioned this time and again, if there is a priority sector nominated and the government says that X percentage of funding has to go to that particular sector, for instance, agriculture, for instance, we say that a certain percentage needs to go there, then banks can be mandated that you have to have X percentage of your portfolio into agriculture. And if you're not willing to put it into agriculture because you do not have rural reach and you're not able to take risks of that nature, deposit it with a central bank, which might be, in this case, say FDB, for instance, Fiji Development Bank, who has rural reach. And FDB will use other agencies in order to put that lending there. And FDB in turn will not pay much on the deposits that these banks make. So if per my percentage, if I have to lend 50 million to the agricultural sector, I'm only lending 20 million. The 30 million that I can deposit with FDB, I will get no interest on it. But FDB in turn will lend it to the rural areas. And therefore, the 50 million that's meant to go to the rural areas will go to that sector. So I think prioritizing it is a way, and it can be achieved in this manner.
Thank you, Ram. James?
Thank you. Thank you, Kay, for the question. I just wanted to mention that in tourism, in my 30 years experience there, we have a lot of forum of our internal discussions on where we come together as an industry and we close the door and air our dirty laundry and we identify ways we can improve. In those 30 years, we've had a session where we used to call it was called the Meet the Minister session. It was a very popular session. We had all the ministers there. This is 30 years ago and the subsequent years thereafter. They normally would have a panel and they would give us their wish list. And I remember very clearly, every year, the Minister of Agriculture of whichever government was then, they always plead to the industry to help them out, help out the agricultural industry. And the response has always been the same. We want to help. We are helping, but these are the standards. So I was just discussing with Lavinia this morning. Imagine if one minister 20 plus years ago, or even as recent as our last forum, just took the wheel to say, enough talking, we're going to get into it, get our hands dirty, and look at the opportunities in tourism. We'll be in a different situation right now. I was fortunate to to attend Lincoln University in Christchurch, and it specializes in agricultural college. So I went through with a lot of Fiji students who were there on scholarship studying agricultural science, which I understand was up to apply the commercial factor into agriculture and also research. I've never seen those colleagues again. So those are just some of the questions I'm just throwing out. Are we really serious about it? And I think COVID has brought us to that starting point again. Just my final point is on, it's good we're talking, but we still need to be mindful of the threat of COVID. We're seeing the last few days that Europe has closed again. They try to open to take advantage of their summer holiday season, but they've closed again due to the imported infection. It's always easy for us to read in the paper and say it's happening to someone else. It could happen to us at any time. And for us to see photos in the papers of people, rugby matches, and there's no social distancing, we are going right back to our, the sanitizers are nowhere to be seen, and we are really going back to that phase where we make ourselves vulnerable. I think we need to help each other and educate each other. If we contain, and government's really pushing this, if we contain the virus and remain a COVID-free, when the borders do open, through managed processes, we will stand to bring people back to work in a managed form. I think that point is very important, Stan, that needs to be, continue to be talked about. No more complacency. Just last point, I'm going to go rogue here. Isn't it okay? I'm going to speak. In my community in Nandi, you're encountered with reports of children coming to school, no breakfast, no lunch. And I just did an informal survey to a class 2 student, a daughter of one of our managers yesterday, asking, what is happening during lunch? Oh, so-and-so take their empty lunch boxes to the canteen to get their lunch, sponsored by, whatever goodwill organization has put a handout. I don't know about, and I'm sorry if I offend people viewing, but to not be able to give one meal to your child, it's inexcusable. I think so. So we need to have a bit of, and I say this to our church community, where is the Yalonimbole, the Yalombolembole? We don't just give up and send children vulnerable to school, no breakfast, no lunch. I think also I bring in the point, and I'm still going rogue here, to call on the traditional leaders. I think my Tovata, the Turanga Tuimaduata, has started the process, calling his people back to the Vanua. Some people may be called, categorized, or regard themselves as Susumandrai, cannot go back. Yes, you can. If your chief calls you, go back. It just eases the social problem in the urban areas and allows other institutions to look after those who have no choice. So, and that's what it goes back to, if people reset and really analyze where they are and the options that they have, they will make the right decisions. So that's, I'm sorry again.
Thank you, James.
But,
you have a right to go rogue. We're resetting Fiji. I think on that note, I think there's a good point to end on, because it's not over, but hey, we're fighting back. And that's what Reset Fiji is all about. It's about getting into these discussions, bringing up solutions, ideas, innovations about how Fiji will bring itself back from this situation, this pandemic, this challenging experience that we are going through, because that is what it is. It is an experience in this journey that we have. It has been a privilege for me being your moderator for Reset Fiji, and I would like to thank our co-sponsors, Roop Investments Limited, Fiji Water Foundation, Fiji Women's Rights Movement, We Rise Coalition, Social Education Empowerment Program, and the European Union for their support. Our local service providers, Rise Beyond the Reef, New Grills, Kanalevu, Mad Hatter, The Greenhouse, our locust florists for the beautiful flowers, the Deaf Association of Fiji, and the Deaf Consultancy Pacific. And finally, Reset Fiji, our partners, the sponsors for the event, the people who have made this happen. Much appreciation to them. Oxfam in the Pacific, the University of the South Pacific, Pacific Network on Globalization, and MyTV, That's the Reset Fiji Season 1 from our finale here at Laudala campus at USP. Ni Samoa.